Hi, I'm Courtney, and you are listening to Kata Kata Ka, a podcast where we gather researchers and get them to answer our pressing questions about their field. In this episode, we will talk about biological control approaches in insects. Chemical pesticides and insecticides in general are effective ways to control insect populations, but they are well documented to have side effects that could harm the environment and the health of the community in the long run. Some insects can also become more immune to these chemical approaches. More worryingly, some of these chemical approaches can also affect other insects that are good for the ecosystem. Instead of solely relying on these chemical-based approaches, researchers have found the more eco-friendly means called biological control approaches by using the insect's natural enemies to control their population. How are these biological control approaches different from chemical insecticides? How do we test for the effectivity of these controls? And how do we make sure that the environment is not harmed to the introduction of these new methods? Here to answer our questions are
Hi, I'm Amalin, and I'm currently with the De La Salle University, but my training as an entomologist started when I was bachelor and master's degree in UP Los Baños, and continued my training in a more bio-based control of pests in the University of Florida in Gainesville and also in Homestead, Florida. So I decided to become a balik scientist and came back home for a long-term engagement as a balik scientist. And after 2 years of my engagement as balik scientist, I decided to stay in the Philippines because I felt that my expertise will be of good use or better use of our farmers here in the Philippines. So during my balik scientist, I worked with the farmers of cacao in the Philippines and introduced to them the bio-based approaches in controlling the insect pests. And then continuing on my saga as an entomologist now in the Philippines, I work with my colleagues here, Doc Billy and Doc Tads on bio-based of both agriculture and medical importance. I hope to discuss with you along with my colleagues on the importance of bio-based, not to replace pesticide, but to complement the use of it with the chemical control.
My name is Thaddeus Carvajal. I graduated from De La Salle University for my bachelor's and also for my master's. And then afterwards, I went to Japan under the Mombusho Scholarship to train under the supervision of Dr. Kozo Watanabe in his laboratory on mosquitoes. So my study would look into the biology, the ecology, and the control of medically important mosquitoes such as your dengue mosquitoes. So what I'm doing is that I'm looking at the biological aspects as well as the ecological aspects to create what we call certain or develop vector control strategies against this mosquito. Now, after my PhD in Japan, I still continued to become a postdoctoral researcher under the same laboratory. And just like Dr. Amalin, last year, I came back to the Philippines as a balik scientist to help out in the projects of Dr. Amalin regarding the surveillance of mosquitoes using the automated real-time trapping system. Okay, and also do some work in relation not only to mosquitoes but other vectors of diseases.
Hi, Courtney, and good day to our dear listeners. I'm Billy Joel Almarinez. Currently, I'm Associate Professor of De La Salle University in the Department of Biology, and I'm also an entomologist of the Biological Control Research Unit of the Center for Natural Sciences and Environmental Research, which Dr. Divina Amalin is the director of. I, Dr. Carvajal, and Dr. Amalin, we are working closely on some of the Biological Control Research Unit's project. I had my master's and PhD from De La Salle University. Actually, to tell you the truth, I really got trained as an entomologist only in my PhD when I became Dr. Amalin's academic son. Okay, so I still work on identifying and studying the biology and the ecology of insects as well as spiders to assess their potential as biological control agents against pests, in particular insect pests of agricultural as well as possibly medical and veterinary importance. I also dabble in some modeling studies. I do species distribution modeling. I see it as a potential tool to forecast possible pest invasions. And also, fairly recently, we have been doing some studies on ecological networks. So modeling ecological networks to see the different interactions of different components of an agro ecosystem and how some of these factors tend to influence, say, the biological control potential of a natural enemy, or how it could influence, how those factors could eventually influence productivity of the crop plant. So we would like to see the bigger picture using modeling, specifically using p-graph.
Thank you po. Thank you po for all the panelists for your introductions. So before we start talking about biological controls, can we have an overview po on why we cannot solely rely on chemical approaches, and which is why mas okay to yung biological control or integrations with biological controls?
The importance of having not only chemical control, no, and the control of pest management is the long-term harmful effect of just using the pesticide, because it has been proven, no, na relying heavily on pesticide, it's harming the people, no, because of its toxic effect, no, and also harming our environment, and that leads to also harming the community. And that is because of the development of yung resistance tinatawag natin, no, and the resurgence on overuse or and misuse, not only over but misuse of yung different pesticide, particularly the broad spectrum insecticide. So what is insecticide resistance? What is resistance? So ito yung you're using over and over the same pesticide or the same insecticide, and the pest is already resisting it. So it's not anymore as effective as the first usage of it. And the pest resurgence is targeting or affecting the non-targets. And the non-targets are the biological control agents, yung mga natural enemies that is already proven controlling or managing the population of a certain pest, and then because they are more vulnerable to the pesticides, so they are the first one to get killed, and so the pest that they are controlling increases and then pose more damages to the crop, no, that it's affecting. So that's the main issue in the overuse and misuse of this pesticide. So we cannot really solely depend on chemical control, but rational use of it, and in combination with other control measure as well as using bio-based control measure will be a better strategy in controlling this pest, no, of agricultural importance. And besides, this is more economical because sometimes you don't need really to control this pest because they are under control of these natural enemies.
So biological control approaches kasi, of course, kunyari in mosquitoes or in any insects, there are a lot of parang ways to control them. So there could be what we call physical, there could be mechanical, environmental, diba? And then of course, another would be the biological control approach. The definition of that is that you use natural organisms or they can consider other organisms in order to bring down the population or probably try to reduce the population of your target insect. So madaming mga categories yan when we look at biological control approaches. So number one, of course, you have the plant-based, meaning that you use plant extracts too. You have predators, other insects. I think that one example of that would be Dr. Almarinez. Yung insect, which is the Comparella, but it's not a predator, but normally it's a parasitoid. Okay? 3, it would be bacterial. Number 4, you have also fungal. And some would actually use, like in mosquitoes, yung mga rear and release methods. Now, Dr. Amalin stressed out that in dealing with these insects, like for example, either pests or vectors, chemical use is very rampant. Ito yung ginagamit ng lahat para puksain, di ba, yung mga peste na to. However, insecticide resistance actually develops, and sometimes not only that insecticide resistance develops, also it can be toxic to the user, to the animal, okay, in livestock, for example, in agriculture, or can be toxic to the environment itself. So biological control approaches uses organisms, natural organisms that is found in the environment to have a negative effect towards to the pest or to the vector that you are targeting.
Okay, to add to what, if you may allow me, I would like to call her Mommy Divine. Just to add to what Mommy Divine and Doc Tads mentioned about one the use of the use and the dependence on chemical pesticides, which is the development of insecticide resistance or pesticide resistance. Kasi ganito yan eh, ano? We are introducing a mortality factor, and we tend to do selection, ano? So there would be some members of the population of the pest that would of course readily die due to the application of the pesticide. However, there would be chances that some, say, sabihin na natin, yung mga hardier members of the population may survive the pesticide application. So they stay there and they get to reproduce. So alam na natin, genetics, ano, those genes with pesticide resistance get transferred to the next generation. Eventually, that next generation proliferates. So the next time you apply the same pesticide, it will no longer work as effectively as before. Now, an advantage of biological control and bio-based approaches is this. Ano, in particular, sorry, ano, I may be jumping the gun a bit about biological control. Ano. When we say biological control, like Stads correctly put it, ano, we are using natural enemies, predators, parasitoids, pathogens. So these are living things. Now, would there be a chance for pests to develop resistance against these natural enemies? Kasi we're talking about selection. Okay, pwedeng nagkakaroon ng microevolution. However, take note, since we're talking about natural enemies, these are living things. So they also adapt and they evolve. So they tend to co-evolve with their prey or their host. So mas ano siya, mas not just environmentally sound, but also it's more sustainable in the long run. Okay, so it's even if the pests tend to develop, say, defenses against the natural enemies, eventually some of the natural enemies themselves would also co-evolve or co-adapt so that they can more effectively attack the pest. So that is one advantage. So and that's one really a big disadvantage of just relying on chemical pesticides. Kasi ang chemical pesticides, anong gagawin natin? Increase lang natin yung dosage, increase lang natin yung formulation in response. However, it's the same. It's going to be the same chemical. Unlike if it's not, it's the natural enemies. Diba? So there would be changes that get to be carried on and maybe even change together with the pest. So unfortunately here in the Philippines, right, Tats and Mommy Divine, here in the Philippines, talagang nakafocus ang karamihan sa ating mga kababayan sa pagsugpo sa mga peste gamit mga chemical.
Actually, yun po. Parang, paano po
Yes, that's correct.
bakit po ganun? Parang, if natural na po yung pang kontra dun sa pest, bakit, and sa mga ibang insects, bakit bakit nag-switch to chemical? Like, yun, bakit sobrang rampant?
Yes, currently kasi most of the pest outbreak, yung malaking damages, no, from insect pests or diseases ay coming from invasive species or invasive pest species. Pag dumating kasi yung invasive pest species sa atin, no? Invasive, ano ba yung invasive species, no? These are pest species or species coming from other countries. Now, when it invade other countries and there is no available natural enemies to maintain its population at a level that it will not cause any harm, it will go to an outbreak situation. No, and the first resort on that, is to kill it right away. And to kill it right away, it's always is the chemical control. Hindi yan nawawala. It's even in the US, when there is an outbreak of pest from invasive, ang una nilang target, ang una nilang decision is to have chemical control pest. Ano bang chemical na makakakontrol nito? But then they don't stop there. Okay, they still look at potential natural enemy or potential biocontrol approach that eventually will minimize the use of these pesticides. So it's always is because it's an invasive pest species kaya nagkakaroon around the world. It's the
I see.
same scenario.
I'm just thinking out loud. Let's say, for example, the may invasive species. Could we go to the host country and get their natural enemies and bring it here?
Definitely,
Okay.
definitely. And that is called classical biological control agent. Kasi yung classical biological control is introducing the natural enemy of that particular phage that invaded the country. No, but the problem sa atin kasi it's not very open to release or to introduce this because of the, I don't know, the strictness nung ating rules or laws regarding introduction. So hindi pa masyadong yung regulation of it. I think kailangan matingnan, no? Kasi in other countries, they are allowing classical biological control, particularly pag na-identify na nila na ito pala invasive coming from this particular country. So nag-explore talaga sila from that country to look for the natural enemies kasi usually yung mga invasive species in their original places or countries, they're not a problem kasi meron nga silang natural enemies. So yun yung ini-explore ng mga experts on entomologists, no, pag merong outbreak sa country. In particular, yung US is very big on classical biological control kasi ang daming dumadating na invasive pest species doon na recorded at saka alam nila kasi ready sila for that, but we are not that ready yet. It's not too late on that.
Okay, just to add lang kay Dr. Amalin, for the why yung madami gumagamit ng chemical use, ganun rin sa mga lamok. Like for example, in dengue, I think Courtney, di ba, kapag nagkaroon ka ng outbreak of dengue cases, barangay, for example, on a certain place, what they do immediately is they apply like yung mga fogging, diba? So that is actually chemical based. Na of course their main intention there is really to actually kill or try to kill the adults, okay, that may have the virus that may transmit it to the humans or to the people around them. So kaya nga sang-ayon ako kay ma'am na parang immediate yan sa gobyerno natin or even not only in the national but in the local government units na nakita ko sa barangay that immediate na pagka magkaroon ng mga dengue case outbreaks during the rainy season, agad sila magpapa-fogging. So in response to the outbreak that is happening, kasi ibig sabihin nun, maraming lamok probably na may dala ng dengue virus na yun. So, yun ang ginagawa. And then, pangalawa, like sa of course kasi sa mga bahay-bahay natin, the use of alam mo yung mga bygone or other products that are used for killing pests, not only for lamok but also with cockroaches. Over time, of course, some of them are still somehow effective, but over time, like what Sir Billy said, there are some that would actually develop yung insecticide resistance. So typically embedded pa rin sa atin that the use of the chemical control, but it needs to be complemented. Kung talagang kailangan gamitin siya, then pwede, but it has to be regulated or it has to be applied in a certain way, parang ganon. Okay, as si Sir Billy yata may sabihin. Go ahead, sir.
Quick fix kasi ang ang chemical pesticide
True.
There's that impression, di ba, na mag-spray ka ng pesticide, patay agad. Kasi that's the thing. Most people, especially Filipinos, especially Filipino farmers. Sorry, not to belittle or disparage our fellow Filipinos, but this is something that has to be corrected. We are always after quick fixes, but we do not look at the long-term effects or the broader picture. Mabilis nakakapatay agad ang chemical pesticides. Whereas, if we were, actually, Court, just to add on the concept of classical biological control na binanggit ni Mami Divine, actually, yes, it can be done. It's being done. However, before we really can ascertain that it can be used against a pest. Well, if it's really a pest, an invasive pest, yes. So, ano yun? Sure yun na makakatulong na bumaba yung population ng pest. However, we still have to conduct some studies to ascertain that this natural enemy, if it's introduced to another area where it's not a native of, that it will not affect other species. Kasi baka may tendency after niyang puksain or pababain yung population ng pest, baka lumipat siya sa ibang species na hindi naman peste. Masama kung halimbawa ay maging siya, masama kung beneficial yung inatake ng natural enemy.
Yes,
Kaya
that's
kinakailangan, so it has to entail, biological control entails studies which would take time. Yun yung hindi yun yung
Yes,
parang
that's correct.
'di ba? Asat na asat tayo, gusto natin
That's
resulta.
correct.
Di po ba?
That's a very valid point, no, of Billy. Usually it takes, I mean, I've worked with the classical biological when I was still in the US, and usually when we introduce biological control agents for particular invasive pest species, marami na kaming na-handle na ganyan. The quarantine procedure before it gets released to the field, it takes at least 2 to 3 years. Parang lang sigurado that it will be just targeting the pests of concern and not the non-targets. Kasi ang pinaka classic example niyan ay I think it's Silis Vidalia wherein it was released, it's a coccinellid, yung tawag natin is ano yun?
ADB po,
Pulisap na kuba. Kaya hindi ka naman tawag. Basta coccinellid. Yeah. A very classical example of that is also the classical example of very very successful classical biological control that is Vidalia from the country of origin. I think, if I'm not mistaken, kung saan, introduced in California to control yung Cottony-Cush scale, isang scale na nag-iin sa maraming plants, in particular yung citrus. Ni-release nila kasi importante yung citrus sa US. And so, in the long run, naging problema nila yung Vidalia beetle kasi it attacks other pests, so and other insect in that so they have to regulate it. So nagkaroon ng regulation na yung introduction ng classical biological control agent, and there should be dapat really specific yung inintroduce mo doon sa target pest, and it takes number of years to be sure that it will be very specific to that particular pest. So yung mga ini-introduce natin, so we have to be very careful, si Tads very careful yan because of the Wolbachia, Tads, but Tads can say that about that later. And then tayo lucky, yung ating isang outbreak na galing sa invasive species is we have natives and that's pwedeng ibida ni Billy Mamia yung ating success story. So really is when you use introduction of biological control agent, it will take number of years to be before it gets released in the field kasi you have to make sure that it will not affect the non-targets.
I see.
Actually, I will add lang kay Dr. Amalin and also kay Sir Billy, di ba? Sa mga lamok. I think I always present this sa mga conferences when before mag-pandemic, yung 2019, Courtney, biglang nagkaroon ng twofold increase ang mga dengue cases sa Pilipinas. So the average na 200,000 naging 400,000. Now, some of majority of the cases ng twofold na to is coming from provinces. Kaya ang nangyari dyan, nung biglang nagkaroon ng parang sabihin natin, di ba pandemic, but an epidemic, yung tatawag nila, then yung mga ibang local government units, biglang ginamit ang biological control. Sa Quezon City, for example, makikita mo yung sa mga balita, you can still Google them if you want, nag-release sila ng mga parang frogs sa isang creek. Tapos sa Pangasinan, nag-release sila ng mga parang mosquito fish or mga predators. Now, di ba ma'am, ang dami yun sa balita eh. Ang dami yun sa balita. And then parang naging very viral siya because of this particular actions. Because some scientists are saying that you just don't put immediately an introduced animal dyan, di ba? Or an introduced organism. You have to know a lot of it, like the factors, the biology, and the perceived risk, di ba? Or if ever na magiging effective na talaga siya. So, kunyari, yung mga frogs na yun dun sa creek na yun, rather than puksain niya yung mga mosquitoes doon, baka maging threat rin siya doon sa if ever whatever fauna is found there as well. So rather than targeted lang siya sa mosquito, tina-target rin niya yung mga ibang insekto. So tama yung sinasabi nila na it take time. Doon ko nakikita yung sinasabi rin ni Sir Billy na ang mga Pinoy ay paminsan gusto agad ng quick fix, di ba? Meaning that since that these methods, some of them are published and published and well studied. If you try to look at the literature, not all of them are mostly laboratory-based. Konti lang ang community-based. And if you look at their effectivity, effective siya at a certain sense, but hindi ganun ka-sustainable. So we can talk about that later in this case. But ito lang yung sinasabi ko na parang yung sometimes na hirap when we are trying to do biological based approaches, because it takes time. You cannot do a 1-year study or even diba? You have to continuously observe and see what happens on this case. Okay, kasi Sir Billy, go.
Kasi paumanhin na kasi nabanggit mo na rin yung pagpapakawala ng mga palaka sa Quezon.
Oo.
Actually yung mga palakang yon, they are cane toads, Rhinella marina.
Oo.
Yun yung mga palaka na nakikita natin sa kalsada after umulan, tapos sa sasagasaan nagiging mga road waffles. Di ba? Yung mga palakang yun, kaya ako naalala ko lang you know what? Australians are actually very wary about biological control. Well, at least the common Australian. You know what? Because yung cane toad in particular, up to now, it's really a pest in Australia. Kasi anong nangyari dyan? Nagkaroon ng insect pest sa sugarcane. I think it's the cane beetle sa mga sugarcane plantations sa Australia. So ang ginamit nila, quick fix, kumuha sila, nag-import sila ng mga cane toads. I think from Southern America and then to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to Australia. Nagpakawala sila ng mga palaka. Ang problema, hindi naman talaga nasugpo ng palaka yung pamimesti ng cane beetles. Kasi yung mga cane beetles, yung mga adults, they feed on the foliage. Medyo mataas. Alam naman natin ng mga sugarcane, matataas yung shoots niyan eh. So hindi makakain ng palaka kasi yung palaka hindi man umaakyat yan ng sugarcane eh. 'Di ba? Tapos yun namang mga namimesti din ng mga larvae ng cane beetles nasa pinakailalim. Hindi rin naman maghuhukay yung palaka para panginain doon. So ngayon, instead of being a biological control agent, that natural enemy also became an invasive species. Ang problema sa cane toad, di ba? Yung mga palakang yan, pagka meron kang ayan, nakikita ko, Corty, may alaga kaya tang aso, may fur baby ka. Mag-iingat ka, pagka merong cane toad sa garden ninyo, huwag mong hayaan na kainin siya or isubo siya ng aso mo kasi nakakalason siya. And that's what happened in Australia. Walang predators yung cane toad kasi toxic siya eh. Walang mga ahas na umaatake sa cane toad. Yung mga dingoes, I think, mga aso, yung mga wild dogs sa Australia, nagkakanda mamatay pag ina-attempt nilang kainin yung cane toad. So naging invasive species, naging pest siya tuloy ngayon. So yun nga, just to drive home the point, biological control seems to be not so appealing at first glance, especially to Filipinos, because it will take time. It will really take time. So ayun, so hindi kasi natin masyadong titingnan agad yung viewer, especially during emergency situations. Nagkakawindang-windang yung mga agricultural workers kasi kailangan nilang sugpuin agad yung peste. And what's the quickest fix? Pesticides, chemical pesticides.
Yeah.
So yung cane toads po ba and yung fishes na introduce sa mosquito ay yung dengue na epidemic, naging nuisance po sila. Talaga.
We don't know. We don't know yet if they become a
Okay.
nuisance. But ang pinaka point dyan is that were they effective in controlling the mosquito population and reducing the dengue cases in that area. Kasi, 'di ba, you do a biological control approach. In medical terms kasi we term this as intervention. You create an intervention to have an outcome, at yung outcome mo na yon would be the reducing disease transmission. So kagaya kina ma'am, by applying this biological control approach, ang kanilang outcome is reducing the spread or the abundance of the pest in that, or to reduce the damage caused by this pest in this in a farm or in an agricultural sector. Ganun ang nangyayari because maglalagay tayo na alam natin because of science, marami tayong nabasa, pero hindi talaga siya pinag-aaralan ng matagalan. So dapat talagang from the very start, talagang observe mo until dun sa pinaka huling part wherein that what will be the outcome of that biological control approach. Ang maganda diyan na kwento yung actually kina Doc Divine pati kay Sir Billy na for the coconut scale insect. Okay? And I think that Sir Billy could actually give that, and then I can give examples rin, Courtney, just to understand kung where we are coming from, why certain biological control approaches would be effective and not at certain situations. Okay. Yan. Sige, Sir Billy.
Yung
Sige, bago
Oh, yeah.
mag-storya si Billy, kasi si Billy talaga yung nag-work doon, no? But I'd like to point out na not all natural enemies will work. Okay? Hindi lahat ng biological control agent ay successful, no? Swerte lang tayo, no? Na we have this, no, yung Comperia lacalawanica, that it's really very, very effective on this invasive pest species na coconut scale insect. But if it works, no, dapat ang take ng community is to preserve it, to provide the correct habitat, no, para dito sa mga biocontrol agent na to, para continuously it can manage the population and will maintain the level that ng population na hindi na siya makaka-harm sa, or will maintain the economic threshold level ng peste, kung ano man peste yon on that. Yeah, so not all biocontrol agents will work. The more that yung introduction of biocontrol in the country should be given the utmost evaluation, no? The evaluation under a quarantine facility before it gets out of the field, no, to release in the field. Okay, go ahead, Bilena.
Baka merong pero just to follow up on what Mommy Divine said and what Tad said. I think one of the, I think many things that's lacking with regards to like release of natural enemies biological control agents, especially in the context of dengue mosquito control, and well, I think to some extent, correct me if I'm wrong, Mommy Divine, to some extent also with regards to chemical control of some pests, is the lack of proper monitoring and follow-up studies.
Exactly.
Diba? Nangyari, nagpakawala sila ng palaka, nagpakawala sila ng mga isda. Meron bang
akala nila maayos na, iwanan mo
ayos
na lang.
Na, tapos na.
Tapos na tayo.
Yes. Totoo yun, ma'am.
Exactly. That's true.
Kahit yung kahit yung sa case nung sa Cocolisap, 'di ba, Mommy Divine, nag-inject sila ng insecticide. Kasi Courtney, parang ginawa nilang tao kunyari, parang well, totoo naman na instead of spraying or dousing the foliage or the whole plant with chemical insecticides, ang ginawa para kontrolin, an attempt to control the Cocolisap, yung coconut scale insect na nag-cause ng outbreak sa Southern Tagalog between 2010 and 2016. Nag-inject sila ng chemical pesticide, dinotefuran, So ang principle, inject yung insecticide, and by translocation, so kasi 'di ba may mga vascular or mga tubular networks sa loob ng trunk ng coconut. So ang assumption is aakyat 'yon, yung insecticide, papunta doon sa mga dahon na pinipeste ng Cocolisap. The thing is, I don't think, tama ba, Mommy Divine? Walang gumawa ng study eh. Walang gumawa ng proper study kung talaga
No,
bang
at least
na-translate.
walang documented. We
Yeah.
really don't know if they did that, but you can, hindi natin malalaman kung kung walang documentation in the form of reports or in the form of publication. So wala yun.
Yeah, that's what's lacking. Yun yung
Yeah.
kaya kami sa side namin ni na Mami Divine, medyo before medyo outsiders tayo sa De La Salle University. Now, nung pumasok, God sent talaga si Mami Divine sa De La Salle University at sa Pilipinas. Kasi
Yes.
nung nagbalik scientist si Mami Divine, tapos nangyari yung I think a few years after, nangyari yung Cocolisap outbreak. So, isa sa mga naging interest ni Mami Divine yan, na aralin. Bagamat meron ng mga nag-aaral, may mga gumagawa na ng pananaliksik from other institutions, from other agencies. But then, we wanted to have access to information that we thought was already available. Wala kami makuhang information kung meron na bang na-identify na natural enemies kasi forte talaga ni Mami Divine ng biological control. So, ang namin, meron bang na-identify na natural enemies? So, wala kami makuhang information. Ang alam lang namin, nagre-release sila ng mga coccinellid beetles, mga predators, and then nagpapakawala sila. Pero walang information kung effective ba. So, Mami Divine thought, let's do our own study. So, nagsimula yon sa nagsimula yan, naalala mo Mami Divine, yung tatlo nating mga alaga noon, sina Demi,
Yes.
sina Marie, tsaka si Marco. So silang tatlo. So yung isa sa kanila, dalawa sa kanila, natural plant-based biopesticide control, biopesticide-based control ng Cocolisap. Yung dalawa sa kanila. Yung isa naman, si Marco, survey of natural enemies. Yung kanyang study para sa kanyang undergrad thesis. And then somewhere along the way, kasi to cut the long story short, Mami Divine and I, while we were doing our own surveys in Hidden Valley Springs Resort in Calauan, Laguna, kasi doon hindi nagpapapasok ng mga tauhan ng government agency para mag-trunk injection ng dinotefuran. So no chemical control whatsoever, mechanical control lang, cultural control lang ang ginagawa nila. So nakakasiguro kami na kung may makita kami dong natural enemy na eventually ma-identify namin as associated with Cocolisap, then merong chance na baka ito ay potential biological control agent. And thank God, ganun na nangyari. Sinusuit kasi ako noon, admittedly, bagito ako noon nung time na yon. Si Mami Divine, so suyod-suyod kami ng mga dahon ng nyog. Tapos may nakita kami na gumagapang-gapang, sabi ni Mami Divine. Sabi niya, Billy, kunin mo yan. Ano yan? Parasitoid yan. Ako naman, malay ko ba ano itsura ng parasitoid? 'Di ba? Alam ko mag-identify ng lamok, kiti-kiti ng lamok. Alam ko mag-identify ng mga salagubang. Pero hindi ko alam yung parasitoid, mga parasitic was liit, parang kuto. Nagdagbaga kasi kunin mo yan. So kinuha ko, kinolekta namin yung specimens. Tapos kumolekta din kami ng mga specimens ng mga Cocolisap. Nasabi ni Mami Divine, ito parasitized yan kasi merong itim sa gitna. Pero hindi namin alam kung yung parasitoid na nakuha namin, yung adult na gumagapang-gapang, kung siya rin ba yung nagpaparasitize doon sa sample ng Cocolisap na kinolekta din namin. So ang ginawa ko, inuwi ko yung sample na parasitized na Cocolisap. Tapos, pinoto-document ko yung nakuha namin na adult specimen, and then I initially identified it at the genus level. Tapos, kinabukasan, lo and behold, it's the same insect that came out of the parasitized Cocolisap. So doon na namin na-ascertain na ito ay natural enemy, parasitoid siya. But the next question was, how effective is the parasitism of this parasitoid? So doon na, kaya nagkaroon na ako ng dissertation topic ko, at yun, nagawa na namin ng studies. And eventually, again, to cut the long story short, eventually we're able to prove that yung na-discover namin, which we eventually named Comperiella calawanica, kasi nga sa Calauan, Laguna namin na-discover yung first specimens. We found that it parasitize Cocolizap, Astidiotus rigidus at very high levels. Pumapalo sa close to 100%. Sa biological control, pagka above 50% yung parasitism or predation, well, that could be a sign lang, hindi pa definitive na feature, pero sign, indication na maaring candidate biological control agent siya. Kasi okay, inaatake nga niya. Ang susunod mo titingnan dyan, how specific is the natural enemy? How specific is the natural enemy? Ito lang ba ang aatakihin niya o kaya din ba niya mag-atake sa iba? So, fortunately, thank God, eventually we found that the insect we discovered, only parasite. Up to now, we haven't found an alternative host, but we have a hypothesis that it could have an alternative host. But so far, we haven't found that alternative host or alternative hosts yet. So, it's highly specific. Ang taas ng parasitism niya. And eventually, yun nga sinasabi ni Mami Divine, success story in biological control because now it's being recognized by the Philippine government, by the Philippine Coconut Authority as the biological control agent and a definite control measure against Cocolizap. And we have done some tests in other places like in Zamboanga. We also had some, our colleagues, our collaborators from PCA in Albay and also in Romblon. Kaya yun nga, gaya na sabi ni Mami Divine, it's not always the case. But thank God that for Cocolizap that caused a problem here in the Philippines, we were able to come across this very effective natural enemy as eventually identified and recognized as biological control agent. And now, De La Salle University is also, hindi naman sa binubuhat natin yung bangko ng ating university, pero now De La Salle University is being recognized as well nationwide for our biological control endeavors.
Mhm.
So na-control
Actually,
po.
that gives way to the birth of the biological control research unit. Yung isang unit sa sensor. So that's correct, si Billy.
So na-control
Yes,
po.
Courtney.
Na-control po yung Cocolizap. Tama po.
Yeah, definitely yes.
Pero
That's
pag-
actually.
Ay, namatay po sila lahat? Or hindi? Ano po yun?
Well, ang biological control, the use of biological control agent, kasi Courtney, biological control is not only the use of biological control agent. May iba pang mga biocontrol, yung the use of pheromones and pheromones, mga ganun, bio-based, no? Yung ng biological control. But for the Cocolizap, it really brings the population of Cocolizap in any areas invaded into the level that it's not anymore causing economic loss sa coconut production. Kaya that's the success indicator, no? Pag nagko-control ka ng pests on an outbreak situation.
So tama po, yung Cocolizap kasi may ibang purpose naman siya. So bawal siyang completely patayin rin. Tama po ba? Or
Peste siya. Pest siya Cocolizap ay pest ng coconut.
Oh, yes.
Siya yung coconut scale insect. That's ano ba to? Nasabi nila nanggaling sa Indonesia, hindi pa rin naman confirm, no? Kaya siya ay invasive pest species. Kaya nagkaroon ng outbreak kasi wala siyang natural enemy as compared to the other species ng coconut scale insect, no, yung Aspidiotus destructor. Kasi itong Cocolizap na is Aspidiotus rigidus. Yung mga kamag-anak niya na ibang Aspidiotus, they are not a problem because they have already a natural enemy complex here in the Philippines. Kaya hindi siya nag-i-increase ng population to the level that it will affect the production ng coconut. So, ang nangyari, si Aspidiotus rigidus, siya yung invasive, kaya nung dumating siya dito, it gets the outbreak situation, affected ang production ng coconut. Talagang wala kang makita masyadong coconut. And so, kailangan ng immediate control. Yung first attempt will always be a pesticide. No, it's always the first. But then yung Then here comes this biocontrol agent, no? Itong cocolizat that gets established sa coconut scale insect infested area. So ibig sabihin, nandito siya siguro kasi hindi magiging outbreak ang cocolizat na Aspidiotus rigidus if it's already if it came with the biocontrol agent. The assumption is dito siya sa atin, it's a native, it's just in another plant or in another insect, no? And then here comes yung cocolizat, and it took how many years before it get established doon sa coconut plantation with Aspidiotus rigidus. Yun ang hinahanap namin ni Billy. Ano yung alternate host ni Comperiella calawanica? Nasaan siya nung wala pang Aspidiotus rigidus dito sa Philippines? So our story is not yet complete until we find what is that alternate host of cocolizat. Kasi lumalabas, native siya galing siya dito sa Philippines. Nandito na siya sa Pilipinas.
Doc, you also have yung sa Wolbachia, but can you also share that?
Okay. So, yung Wolbachia kasi, so, di ba, mosquitoes natin, maraming mga approaches na sinuggest on how to control them. Okay? So, yung Wolbachia kasi, hindi ko naman talaga parang discovery yan or something. This has been already used in agriculture, and then what happened was hindi ma-introduce, but it was ginagamit siya for mosquitoes now. Now, geto kasi yung backstory kasi may historical mahabang story yan eh. So, what Australian researchers actually try to use Wolbachia to control certain pests in agriculture. And then what happened is that another researcher that works on mosquitoes wanted to replicate that success. Now, when yung Aedes aegypti, yung mismong mosquito that transmits dengue virus, what happened was nalaman nila na walang Wolbachia, natural na Wolbachia sa loob ng kanyang midgut. So meaning it's not a part of the microbiome. So ngayon, ang ginawa nila doon is that they tried to get natural Wolbachia from other insects. So like yung Drosophila melanogaster. And parang a stroke of, like kay na Ma'am Divine, pati kay na Sir Billy, is that all they wanted was to have what we call some negative phenotypic effect. When you say negative phenotypic effect, ito yung parang bababa yung yung mga eggs ng mga females hindi mag-hatch dahil kasi nga Wolbachia infected na siya, or it reduces the lifespan of the female, di ba? So these are some of the effects of Wolbachia in some insects like found in agriculture. But what they found also interesting is that the Wolbachia tends to parang protect the mosquito. That strain na inintroduce nila doon sa Aedes aegypti nila, it blocks the pathogen of dengue, meaning that it doesn't multiply inside. So kumbaga, parang yung Wolbachia na to is like babakunahan mo yung mosquito. So you put like parang a vaccine in order for this viruses not to replicate, or not to replicate in a certain point that it will create, that would be infectious. Kasi 'di ba in microbiology, hindi man ibig sabihin isang virus lang magkakasakit ka na 'di ba? You have to reach the number of virus particles or pathogen particles para mag-exhibit ka ng mga simptomas ng sakit, 'di ba? So nung nalaman nila to, so naging very popular siya because bakit? Number one, di ba sabi ko kanina, may mga iba't ibang biological control approaches sa mga lamok. Bakit hindi gumana itong mga to? Number one, kaya hindi gumagana ang iba is that ang worry nila would be manpower or how it will be applied to the field. Kasi iba sa kanila is very laborious. Meaning, kunyari yung mga plant-based or yung mga pathogen-based or even yung mga pathogen-based like yung mga BTI, you need someone to put that doon sa places na yon. Just like in chemical fogging. So, kailangan mo pa rin ng tao. So, it will not actually be sustainable. Kasi nga, ano yung manpower? Ang maganda sa Wolbachia is that one-time hit lang siya. So all you need to do is just release them once and then let those mosquitoes infect the wild type na nakikita sa environment until lahat sila ay infected. And you make that population stable. Ang tawag doon ay population replacement. Meaning, hindi hurtful to sa mga mosquitoes na to, meaning infect mo lang siya ng Wolbachia, 'di ba? So yun yung kanilang parang selling point because typically other biological control approaches kailangan mo ng labor you need manpower. So if you can reduce that, 'di ba, then this approach would be more sustainable, of course. And ang problema na lang natin dyan would be what could be the potential risk, 'di ba? Now, ang nakakatawang story kasi nito was that I was in Japan when kasi nung una namin kala is that the Aedes aegypti had a natural infection of Wolbachia. Okay? So, nagkamali kami by looking at more of the literature. So parang yung sensei namin is, sige, itry mo lang, tignan natin kung meron or wala. So at the back of my mind, ba't natin itatry? Sayang lang naman sa reagents. Pero he was very insistent, itry that kasi madali naman siyang gawin. So when we tried it out, and I had an undergrad student with me, siya yung gumawa ng lab work for the first batch. So sabi ko nung ginawa na niya and nagkita kami sa cafeteria, ang una talaga namin, alam mo yung nega na yun nasa isip namin, negative yan lahat, parang ganyan, negative na yan lahat, given na yan, alam mo parang ganun kami. And lo and behold, hindi. May sabihan, some of them became positive. Are you sure? Sabi ko ganyan. Sabi ko, baka na naman nagkamali ka. So when we redid the experiments, molecularly, we were able to detect Wolbachia naturally from our Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. Now, parang of course ang hirap nun because a lot of studies at that time were telling wala talagang Wolbachia sa Aedes aegypti. But after several years, after a year or two, because hirap kami to publish that paper because everyone say it cannot, parang wala, hindi yan pwede, parang ganyan, no, parang reject, parang at one point, sige, shelf ko na nga lang tong publication na to. But eventually, some scientists in the US, some scientists also in India were able to also detect, and not only detect, also rare colonies of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes that are natural with Wolbachia. So since kami meron na dito, we confirm that there is actually some populations that has it. Ang kailangan lang namin gawin is that the next step is to make a colony and characterize, meaning does it have the same blocking pathogen effect as the one that the Australian group did. Kasi kung meron yun, that is a game changer because all that we need to do in this case is do what we call a mass rearing and mass release of those mosquitoes and have your mosquitoes, have those parang Wolbachia infected mosquitoes infect the other wild type mosquitoes so that para siyang bakuna, parang papabakunahan mo para hindi na siya mag-transmit ng dengue virus. So we're hoping to study that more. Actually, if you would look at yung sa Indonesia, currently they use the technology by the Australian researchers, and they got actually positive results in terms of reducing the dengue transmission, but it still needs to be studied further, di ba? Mas lalo rin sa Australia, they're still studying the effects or the risk that would contribute by this introduction. Kasi ini-introduce mo yun eh. Yun yung sinasabi ni Dr. Amalin na medyo may mga laws or regulations about the introduction of it. But if it comes naturally in our environment, I think that would be a best candidate. But we still don't know kung whether magiging effective siya or hindi. But ang sa amin is that we still continue to study it and hopefully that it can be used in the near future, diba? Ayun. So yun lang naman yung parang for our case in the mosquito side. So it was of course we're not only limiting our research doon lang. We have to use other biological control approaches. Kasi ang problema kasi is that madaming studies that are done laboratory-based, walang community-based. And then yung mga community-based applications that I call it, meaning you try to study them for not only, kasi ang mostly nakikita namin sa literature, months lang, hindi years. So, dapat years yan. And titignan mo what will happen if ever, for example, you apply this at you don't look at only the mosquito or the biological, pati yung mga tao that is participating with it or the acceptance of it as well. So, madaming madaming factors na dapat may consider because paminsan may mga iba nega dyan or we have a negative public opinion. So, ayun, hopefully to curb already the rising dengue cases in the Philippines, hopefully that this kind of approaches would be, hindi ko nasabi gamitin agad. I mean, to be studied very well and to be, when I say studied very well, dapat hindi lang siya pang 1 year or 2 year lang na project. It's really a commitment na gagawin siya throughout the many years, diba, in this case. So, yun.
Oh, wait. Doc Winnie, I'll get back to you. Pero isang quick question lang po, Doc. How do you infect it? How do you vaccinate it with Wolbachia, yung mosquito?
Okay. So, ganito kasi yon. So, yung Wolbachia kasi, it's actually a bacteria, di ba? So, some insects kasi, not some, but majority of insects, kahit butterfly man yan or meron na kasi siyang Wolbachia sa loob niya. So, ang Wolbachia, depende sa strain, depende sa host, it has a certain effect. So some effect could be positive, meaning beneficial for the host and the endosymbiote. It can have a negative effect. So in mosquitoes, studies said that the presence of Wolbachia in some mosquitoes have a negative effect. So what do you mean by a negative effect? Meaning that it parasitizes the mosquito, di ba? When you say parasitize, it either reduce the lifespan or yung mga embryos niya or yung kanyang eggs not that viable, hindi dadami siya. So yun yung So what you need to do is you need to have that endosymbiote reside inside. So di ba when you say parang sabi ko yung bakuna, di ba? When you have a sickness, you produce the antibodies. Necessary for you to fight that infection again in the future. Just like, for example, chickenpox, diba? So there's a very low probability of you getting chickenpox again if you had that infection while you were a child. Kasi nga, meron ka ng immune ka na doon. You have already the cells that are necessary in order to produce the antibodies against it. So in relation that to the mosquito, kung lagyan mo siya ng Wolbachia and maging natural sa loob ng kanyang midgut, then that Wolbachia would protect the reproduction of your viruses inside the mosquito. Kasi magkakaroon ka parang competition inside the midgut. So by putting Wolbachia there, it will try to stop to limit the reproduction of your virus particles inside. Therefore, hindi siya dadami. Therefore, hindi siya magiging ganun ka-infectious sa loob ng iyong mosquito vector. Kasi nga, ang lagi ko naririnig dyan na whenever I do talks, ba't hindi na lang natin puksain ang lahat ng mga lamok? So it's not that easy as you would see. Kasi remember, these are organisms, okay? Just like us, like humans, we are an organism. And one of the main things that we do is we evolve, we adapt in order for us to survive. So gagawa yan ng paraan upang dumami pa rin sila at mag-survive. Kahit anong gamitin mong approach, if it's not properly implemented, talagang dadami sila. So yung sa Wolbachia is that we have to coexist with them, di ba? Kasi ganun ng nature, patay na lang natin kung sino yung enemies natin, di ba? Ganon. So, meaning we need to coexist with them. So, how do we try to coexist with them for them to just become, regular pests? Kinakagat pa rin tayo, pero hindi tayo nagkakasakit. Kasi may mga ibang mosquitoes ganun eh. Nandyan lang siya, pero hindi ka naman binibigyan ng sakit. So, dapat makagawa ka ng paraan upang mag-coexist kayong dalawa without, hurting each other, parang ganyan. So that's why it's not that very easy just to kill all of the Muslims. Kasi yun ang mentality talaga ng iba na parang dali-dali lang patay ng lamok. Actually, ayaw na magkwento. But may nagganon sa akin one time, parang madali lang patayin yung ipis, tatapakan mo na lang, di ba? Sabi ko, wow, ganun kadali. Di ba ma'am, ganun kadali lang talaga, apakan yung ipis eh. Pero kung madami kasi sila, paano naman yun, di ba? So, yun lang naman yung explanation on the Wolbachia. I think si Sir Billy may add yata. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we cannot overemphasize the importance of research.
Yes.
Kasi yung mindset na gano'n na eradicate everything, eliminate, kill all, di ba? That is born out of lack of understanding about how an ecosystem works. Actually, may mga tanong yan eh. Ano ba ang silbi ng mga lamok sa ecosystem? Ano ba ang
yan.
Actually, natanong ko po yan.
Ganito, no? Madalas kasi, as human beings, we tend to be anthropocentric. We tend to always look at things in the point of view or using the point of view of a human being. Kaya nga sinasabi ko sa mga students ko, try to be less anthropocentric. Human beings are not the center of the universe. Ano? So, halimbawa, mosquitoes. Kasi ang focus lang natin, ang mosquitoes nangangagat. They suck blood. But the thing is, blood is not really their regular diet.
Yes.
They have to feed on blood. The females only have to feed on blood when they have to lay eggs. Other than that, kapag hindi sila hindi naman sila kinakailangan ng itlog, they feed on nectar.
On sugar, yes.
Diba? On sugar. So, they can also be pollinators. Yes. So, eliminate mo lahat ng mga we don't know what plants would be missing some of their pollinators kasi pinatay natin lahat ng lamok. Halimbawa, mga ipis. Ano naman ang silbi ng mga ipis? Kasi nakikita natin mga ipis, pinapabaho yung mga ginagapangan nila, iniiputan nila, or nanginginain sa mga pagkain natin, pinapapangit yung paligid natin, di ba? But they are coprophagous. Kumakain sila ng ebak. Try to imagine, sa damakmak na ebak, saan mo ilalagay yan? Kung ilalagay natin sa sinong uubos sa kanila. Part sila ng decomposition processes eh. So kung wala yung mga ipis, baka naglalakad tayo sa puro tae. 'Di ba? Sorry to use the term to be blunt about it. Diba? So it's a lack of understanding that leads to that kind of mindset. Diba?
I like that.
We cannot overemphasize the importance of research. Eto, balik tayo doon sa kwento ng Kokolisap. Yung sa Southern Tagalog, by 2016 ay bumaba na yung levels of infestation by 2016. And you know what, Courtney? I don't want to name names kasi controversial dahil may election yan. But you know what? There was a certain politician who claimed, who declared in media, but maybe it's not completely his fault. Yun yung binabato sa kanya ng mga experts na pinapakinggan niya. You know what was released in media? Ang nakatulong daw para masugpo ang Kokolisap sa Southern Tagalog ay bagyo, typhoon. Yung Glenda, ewan ko kung naalala mo yun, Courtney, bagyong Glenda.
Apo.
Bagyo daw. Ano yung bagyong Glenda? July 2015. But then it was around that time that we started doing our field work. Kaya nga, again, we cannot overemphasize the importance of studies both in the laboratory and also in the field, as Tads correctly mentioned earlier. So we were already doing our field studies. Dumaan yung bagyo, nandun pa rin naman ang Kokolisap eh. Nandun pa rin ang Kokolisap. Alam namin na yung claim na yon, it seems absurd. But of course, kung sino maingay, especially sa mainstream media, siya yung paniniwalaan eh. Now, can we say it's fake news? Ay, baka kami ang babueltan. Sabihin, kayo nagpe-fake news, sinasabi nyo, ito yung mas prominenteng tao.
Oo nga.
We know what was happening in the field because we were working in the field. So, ganito nangyari, Courtney. Okay, sige, pagbigyan na natin. Now, another outbreak of the same species of Kokolisap as Pediotus rigidus happened in Mindanao, Zamboanga Peninsula, Zamboanga City. Nangyari, Courtney. Hindi madalas dinadaanan ng bagyo ang Mindanao, particularly Zamboanga. Kaya nung nagkaroon ng Kokolisap outbreak doon, and thank God na si Mami Divine na invite ng Philippine Coconut Authority para magsagawa ng ng training workshop doon on biological control of cocolizap using Comperiella calawanica, yung parasitic wasp na na-discover namin sa Calauan, Laguna. So ngayon, nung unang beses na nakapunta kami sa Zamboanga City, ay ako, parang ito, alam to ni Mami Divine at ni Tads, being biologists, we developed that quirk, na kahit na hindi naman talaga pakay mo na mag-field work, alam mo, kahit excursion, patingin-tingin ka sa paligid mo, tapos pag may nakita kang something interesting, para ka na nag-field work. So, naglalakad kami ni Mami Divine doon sa facility ng Zamboanga Research Center. Nakita ko, merong puno doon na may cocolizap, the same species. Kaya sabi namin, na tamang-tama yung timing na magsasagawa ng training doon. Tapos nagkaroon nga ng outbreak. Thank God, may connection na kami. So nakakapagdala na kami, pag pumupunta kami ng Zamboanga Research Center, nakakapagdala na kami ng mga Comperiella that we were mass rearing in our facilities in Laguna campus. So nakapag-release. Tinuruan din namin sila sa Zamboanga Research Center kung paano magparami at mag-release ng Comperiella sa field. And you know what happened, Courtney?
Nakawala.
Unfortunately, we are just audio-based, pero maganda sana ipakita yung before and after, Courtney, 2017.
Hingi ko pa yung photo.
Sige. 2017 and 2018, yung before and after photos. 2017, kitang-kita mo, naninilaw yung dahon ng mga yung mga leaflet, mga fronds ng coconut palms na infested ng cocolizap. And then, Comperiella lang, nag-release ng Comperiella, less than 1 year, 2018. The same coconut palms, completely recovered. Green na yung dahon. Walang dumaan na bagyo. Walang dumaan na bagyo, Courtney. Kaya doon namin na siguro na hindi bagyo kasi saan namin na-discover yung Comperiella sa Southern Tagalog. Yes, dumaan ang Glenda doon pero na-measure na namin ang taas ng parasitism levels ng Comperiella sa cocolizap sa Southern Tagalog. Okay, sige, pagbigyan na natin. For a while, sabihin na natin, for the sake of argument, sige, maaari nga na bagyo, nakatulong. Pero dito, sa case sa Zamboanga, walang bagyo na dumaan. Pero Comperiella lamang yung nirelease at hinayaang magparami. Because you know what? Another advantage, by the way, Courtney, of using natural enemies as biological control agents, effective and specific natural enemies, to be precise, is that once they're there, once they have established a population in the infestation area, and once they have managed the population, take note, Courtney, using natural enemies for biological control does not aim to completely eradicate the pest. May matitira dyan. Kasi paano mamubuhay yung natural enemies kung wala silang kakainin or pangitlogan? Di ba? Magtitira sila. Yun ang maganda eh. Di ba?
Okay.
At kapag dumadami yung natural, yung peste, dumadami din sila. Hindi mo na kailangang every time na makita mo na namumutik-tik na naman sa peste, bibili ka ng pesticide. Hindi, nandoon na sila eh. Nagpaparami na sila na yung kumakalat. Diba? Kasi we're talking about living things here. We're talking about organisms. So, yung kwento na yun talaga yung the value, the importance of doing research, not just laboratory-based, but field-based research, and also transferring the technology to the actual beneficiaries in the field. Yun yung isa talagang na sabi ko, God sent talaga si Mami Divine, not just in De La Salle University but also in the Philippines. Kasi ako, at least sa akin, I think pati na rin kay Tads, natutunan namin sa kanya yung value na hindi natin sasarilinin yung information na nakuha natin para makapag-publish tayo na sa nabakbak na papers, makuha tayo ng citations. But we develop technologies out of our research results and findings. And we share the technology to the actual beneficiaries. Kasi sino ba kaming mga researchers? Kami ba yung nagtatrabaho sa mga plantation ng nyug? Hindi. Di ba? Hindi naman kami talaga eh. Sino yung mga nagtatrabaho? Yung mga farmers, yung mga agricultural workers. Kaya yun. So, through our government-funded projects, we were able to develop that technology, and we were able to transfer successfully the technologies to the beneficiaries. Kaya ngayon, as I have mentioned a while ago, recognized na talaga yung Comperiella calawanica as the biological control agent and a definitive control measure against cocolizap as Pediotus rigidus. So again, for the nth time, we cannot overemphasize the value of research in the laboratory and in the field.
So I have one last question. So we're on the topic of the importance ng research and getting it to the target beneficiaries. But as you all said nga po, there is a resistance din sa community from listening to scientists. Ano po yung pwede not, what could the government do or what could other researchers do to make sure na these technologies that you are making in the lab can also arrive to the community? So is this
Yeah.
something that the
Okay. I'll
government...
start. I'll start.
Yes po. Go po.
Short and sweet. No. Yeah. Science should reach the community definitely to value the investment that is given to research and development, because whatever research result we get, no, should be implemented in the correct way, in the correct place. The key to that, no, and that's, hindi naman nakukulang ang ating gobyerno, no, on that. It's just the difficulty of technology transfer. Yun lang yun. We need to come up with the correct modality kung paano ba natin talaga ito magiging effectively transferred to the targeted audience. Madaling magsalita, pero kasi ang ating mga farmers is to cease to believe. Pagdada ka lang ng dada, hindi naman nila nakikita na ang outcome of it, hindi nila yan ma-appreciate. So, ang ano lang dyan is the correct modality. And I think we have, and there is no one way, there's no one method on that. Iba-iba yan. I mean, it depends on the technology, it depends on the targeted insecticides, it depends on, hindi rin parehong bio-based program. Iba-iba din yung bio-based program, no? So, I think for me, it's the correct modality that will be transferred and easily comprehend and be seen by the targeted audience, the impact of it. Kasi if we really don't convey to them and show to them the impact of it, they will never accept it. Ang acceptance is for them to see that it's working. And that's the case of the Cocolisa, because they saw it by their own eyes on how this little creature was able to control millions and millions of Cocolisa.
Sa akin naman, of course, correct si Ma'am Divine, but I like to add also that in all of my years in research, hindi lang I've seen yung mga different point of views, 'di ba? So just the last message that research, especially in the Philippines, dapat kasi hindi lang what we term multidisciplinary. It should be transdisciplinary, meaning that there should be an overlap on everything, because we as biologists, ito lang yung kaya namin, di ba? Of course, Ma'am Divine and Sir Billy, if you would look at it, Courtney, kaya kasi di ba nung umpisa nag-English pa tayo dito, tapos biglang at the end magtatagalog because we've gone through the field. Mas lalo ko.
Tama ang observation mo,
di ba? So we have to be really parang one researcher has to be discipline or has disciplinary parang approaches, meaning hindi lang yung iisa lang. So probably for those that are listening is that you have to go to each parang perspective to appreciate the holistic point of view, and for you to really find parang strategies or develop ways or means in order to deliver that outcome, di ba? Mahirap talaga yung when you go to technology. I've seen that also, Dr. Amalin. Yan yung sa amin in medical, mahirap i-educate yung mga tao, di ba? I-educate mo siya.
As long as you show them that you're sincere and honest on what you are teaching them, and they see it by their own eyes.
Yes.
You're not gonna get wrong. They will adapt it.
Yes, they would adapt it talaga. So talagang dapat pagdating pa lang yung one of the key success ng Wolbachia program ng Australia is that because of their community. Hindi dahil sa technology nila. It's because of how they educated the community or how they talk to the communities or have the community participate. Kasi kapag wala yon, hindi hanggang technology lang siya, hindi siya mata-transfer or ma-apply. Ayun.
Yeah.
Ito, maybe this is an appeal. Maybe this is an appeal to to our fellow scientists, although this could be really challenging, but I would like to appeal to our fellow scientists and researchers that we should really exert effort into making not just the actual beneficiaries of our research findings, but the general public to be able to at least appreciate our researches, the results, the findings, and the technologies we develop from them. Ano, I can remember one particular senator who I will not name, who in a particular Senate hearing, like she blurted out something, he or she
Ay.
blurted out something to the disgust of many, especially scientists and researchers. Na parang, to sinabi niya, parang ang dating, hindi niya na-appreciate ang value ng research. The way I see it, yes, it's not good to hear, especially from a senator. But I think I can somehow understand where she's coming from. Because many, unfortunately, and this is a reality, many of us in the world of research and science and research, we tend to like see our world within the confines of the four walls of our laboratory or our agency, and rarely do some of us reach out to the community like what Tads mentioned. Kaya yun yung nakita ko talagang something that impressed me and really encouraged and inspired me about what Mami Divine has been doing. Yung mag-reach out. Yun, yung isa. Kailangan tayo mga scientists and researchers, we need to exert an effort. Yes, there could be an argument that I'm not really good in communicating. I'm not really good in laymanizing my research findings. So that is where yung second point na sasabihin ko, effective science communication, which thankfully, Courtney, this podcast, this is one of the endeavors that are at least trying to bridge the gap through science communication between the researchers and the scientists and the general public. And hopefully, we are able to do that sooner than later. Funding, madami nagsasabi na not so funded ang research dito. Well, yes, kung ikukumpara natin sa ibang bansa, ganun nga. Pero mahirap lang kasi we're a developing country and, our government has to prioritize. Diba? And of course, yes, more priority should be given towards research and but as scientists, as researchers, we have to make do with what we have. But the thing is, yes, we have already done, but we have to communicate it effectively. Yun yung isa pang point. And then yung pangatlong point, and siguro masyado na mahaba pagkain ko to, it has to do with our value system. It's not just the responsibility of us scientists and researchers or the science communicators, but also in general the value system of the Filipino public. Kasi 'di ba, kung hindi naman ganun kalaki ang pagpapahal sa agham, sa pananaliksik, sa teknolohiya, dahil ang mas tinatangkilik ay K-pop, mas tinatangkilik ay politika, mas tinatangkilik ay yung mga controversial na mga bagay. Diba?
I like that.
Yung attention binibigay sa science and technology, sisisihin natin ng gobyerno, hindi binibigyan ng attention. Yung general public mismo, hindi nakaka-appreciate, hindi bina-value. Ang education na lang at least, hindi ba? So yun, yung isang kailangan di mabago. So it's a multifaceted concern actually. It's not going to be a single bullet that will solve this problem about how to extend science, how to make masses appreciate science. So it's a multifaceted thing, Maybe another venue we can talk about that. Pero yun yung that's how I see it. But as far as we are concerned, the Biological Control Research Unit, Censor, Mami Divine, Tads, and I beg your pardon, Tads and Mami Divine, if I'm presuming to speak on behalf of you, we are doing our best. Rest assured that we are doing our best to reach not just our colleagues, not just the journals, not just to be recognized by those, but also for our public, for our actual beneficiaries to at least appreciate, kahit hindi na masyadong maintindihan, at least ma-appreciate kung ano yung kahalagahan ng ginagawa namin sa aming pananaliksik.
Thank you. Thank you po for...
Very well said.
Yes.
Very
But
well
here, I
said,
just
yes.
would like to add one thing.
Yes, sorry,
I
don't
think we have to be very serious and more citizen science study, and also inculcate in our education the service learning, which we are doing already in De La Salle University. There are some courses that we have na meron ng service learning modality. And I think seriousness should be put into that, yung citizen science and service learning. And the more that we as a teacher, kami nila, Tads and Billy, should really consider this, integration into our courses, yung service learning, and also how this student can participate in the citizen science thing of whatever, learnings that they will have.
Para may ownership rin po. Will be. Thank you, Rich. We continue
Yeah,
it.
Yeah. And in other countries, they are like that. Like, sa Japan, Tads probably is, have observation of some of these kids in Japan that they, they learn early on being the citizen of their country.
That's true po.
Okay. Thank you so much to our panelists. That's all the time we have today.
Sorry kami kasi di ba kami matitigil?
Parang bad combination
We're so
yata yung
passionate
tatlo
about our thing.
Ano, super interesting po. Di ko natatanungin yung mga ibang questions ko kasi ang ganda po ng topic. Ang ganda
Sana,
po ng
Courtney,
conversation.
na hindi mo tatapakan lahat ng
Ipis. Oo po, yung mahirap yun. Okay. So, thank you po to all of our panelists. That's all the time we have today. But again, thank you to our guest researchers, Dr. Divina Amalin, Dr. Thaddeus Carvajal, and Dr. Billy Joel Almarinez. Thank you for listening to our listeners. And see you in our next episode.
Okay,
Thank you po.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sorry po, nag-over
Do more
time.
of this, Courtney.
Oo.
Oo nga po eh.
I think
Dapat
this is
one by one eh. Kasi sabi ko nga, kung kaming tatlo,
I think
1
this is-
hour,
yeah.
parang hindi yata kaya yan. Eh.
This is a very good platform. A
Mm.
very good platform.
Oo.
Reaching to the general public.
Thank you po. Sobrang interesting
Alright.
na sabi ko, naku, bakit 1 hour ang nilagay ko?
Oo. Sabi ko, tas kaming tatlo pa, naku, patay tayo dyan.
Okay.
Thank you
Alright.
po.
Thank you po.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Billy and
Okay, thank you. Sige, Sir Billy.
Bye-bye.
Sige.
Ingat.
Bye-bye
Bye
po.
po. Bye-bye. Hi, Courtney here. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to know more about the terms, organizations, and people mentioned by our panelists, you can go to our show notes and read more about them there. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow Katakataka on Spotify or YouTube. The podcast is free. It will really help us out if you subscribe, and you can also unsubscribe anytime you want. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Katakataka Pod. That is KATAKATAKAPOD. You can suggest topics and pass us your questions over there. This podcast is fully self-funded, and if you want to support this podcast, you can do so by going to coffee.com/katakatakapod. That is ko-fi.com/katakatakapod. Thank you and see you on our next episode.